Okay, so here's an update on the Skillet. Looks a little different than last time. So, the outside, I'm calling it done. It looks pretty darn good. I don't really see any more areas where there's buildup of the old creosote, grease, soot, what have you. It looks pretty clean. I'm not going to sand the outside smooth. I'm going to leave it rough cast because I don't know, I kind of like it that way. Inside, we're making huge progress here. I'm using a pneumatic die grinder. This little guy, which there's a video called Raw Craft, sponsored by Balvenie Scotch whiskey, I believe, and that's Anthony Bourdain is sort of the host, the late great TV show host. He was a phenomenal chef and host. If you've never seen any of his TV shows, you're missing out. But he called this thing the unholy spawn of a dentist drill and a sander or something like that in a video showcasing Burrow Furnace, which is a small foundry in Syracuse, New York or something like that, where they take used brake car rotors or car brake rotors and cast them into cast iron skillets, and they sand them smooth. That's how they leave their shop. And in that video they point out using one of these things for cleaning up and smoothing out the interior of the skillet after it's been cast. So I'm following in their footsteps, and so far I like what I see. There's deep pits that are inherent to anything cast, whether it's cast aluminum or cast iron. You can kind of see what I'm talking about here and over here. Yeah, you would have to remove an awful lot of material in order to get these out, and I don't know that I'm going to do that, just because not only a time thing, but also, you know, just the integrity of the skillet and the uniform, trying to maintain the uniform thickness of the skillet, particularly on the bottom, in order to ensure that it's going to heat up uniformly or as best as possible. So I'm not going to go digging away in order to get out some of these pits. On the side of the wall, so originally this thing was smooth on the bottom, but it looks like the walls were originally not that smooth. I guess that makes sense. You're not really cooking on the sides that much unless you're cooking like a pie, or baking a pie I should say, but that wouldn't really matter. But anyway, I'm smoothing the walls out because I want the interior of the pan to be uniform in finish once I start seasoning it. So it's not going to take an awful lot longer to finish the interior of it. And yeah, for the exterior, using that pneumatic angle grinder, I mean, the thing worked. I'll be honest, it did the job, but the problem is my air compressor here at my parents' house isn't huge. It's only a 26-gallon compressor, and with that monstrous angle grinder, you run the thing literally for about 12 seconds, and the air compressor kicks on. And that's just, you lose so much time, because after running that angle grinder for approximately let's say 45 seconds, maybe a minute, you really don't have enough air left in the air compressor tank to spin the thing worth a darn, to spin the wire wheel for anything, and it's not, you're not really doing any work at that point. The air compressor in the meantime is running full time in order to try and keep up with the volume of air that you're losing through that tool. So it's just, if I had a much larger air compressor, it would be a different story. But I had to go and buy an electron version of that. Instead of using air, I'm using electrons here. This is a monstrous Makita 7-inch angle grinder. I have a 4.5-inch angle grinder at my place in Wisconsin, which works great, but I've been wanting to get a 7-inch angle grinder, mainly for my other hobby, and that is blacksmithing. You'll see some videos of my blacksmithing once I get that operation set up in my new house. I bought a house in August of 2020 and still don't have the blacksmithing operation set up yet. I have a propane forge dual burner that I built. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of coverage on that to come. But that thing is amazing. Using the cup wire wheel, I cleaned up the bottom of this thing into its current condition in very, very short order. I mean, yeah, probably 80% or 70% of the work was done with the pneumatic angle grinder, but the Makita, once I powered that up, I mean, it went so much faster because you obviously don't have to wait for an air compressor to kick on and supply your air. I don't have an electric version of a die grinder. The pneumatic one works just fine. It doesn't consume that much volume of air as it moves along, and it does the job really well. I'm using these discs, which are like Scotch-Brite pads from hell, and yeah, they're extremely coarse. I've got a whole bunch of them, and you really don't need sandpaper or anything like that. When I'm all done with that die grinder, I'm going to try and see what some sandpaper does. I've got sanding sponges, if you will, such as this fella right here. This is by Gator Grit. I used it earlier, and it's an 80 grit sponge. These do work and they last quite a while. There is an interesting thing I want to point out with using these sanding sponges, or frankly anything involving sanding, whether you have, especially if you have a power sander like a belt sander, or a disc sander, or a little random orbit sander for doing woodworking or something like that. You really, really, really got to have one of these guys. This is, I don't know what this is made out of. It kind of has the texture of hot glue, hard hot glue. And when you run this over, if you have a power sander, you just turn it on and apply this to it. And as you use any kind of sandpaper, power sander, or hand sanding, you're going to constantly be clogging up the spaces in between the grit on the sandpaper. It's going to constantly get clogged up with whatever it is you're sanding, whether it's metal or wood or what have you. And in a short period of time, that sandpaper is going to feel smooth, and you're going to think, frankly, that you've dulled out the grit on that sandpaper and it's now useless. That's not necessarily the case. It feels smooth because it's getting clogged with that media. This cleans that out. So when you are at a point where your sandpaper is full of, it's clogged, and you think it's done for, and you need to throw it away and get a new one, no, get one of these, and you're just going to drag it over. I only have two hands here, but if this is your sandpaper, you just aggressively drag it over, and that sort of glue material there pulls the grit, or the sanded substance out of that grit on the sandpaper, and it's really like new again. This stuff is incredible. So yeah, invest in one of these. It'll save you a heck of a lot of money on sanding material, especially on power sanders like belt sanders and what have you. Yeah, that's it for now. I'm going to keep chugging away on this, and when I feel like I'm done and happy with the interior result, then I will check back in with you guys, and we'll discuss seasoning. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching.